licensed clinical psychologist, best known as Dr. Chloe. She holds a master's degree and PhD in clinical psychology from Long Island University and graduated Phi Beta Kappa, summa cum laude, with a bachelor's degree and departmental honors in psychology from the Columbia School of General Studies. Her practice in New York City employs multiple therapists to serve high-functioning business executives, people in the arts, and everyday people seeking support and personal and professional goals. Dr. Chloe's book, Nervous Energy, Harness the Power of Your Anxiety, was recently endorsed by Deepak Chopra, and she has been featured as an expert on VH1, Inside Edition, and ABC Nightline. I'm really looking forward to the talk. Thrilled you're here, Dr. Chloe, and now I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Dean Gallis-Hickey, and thank you so much to General Studies for inviting me here. It's really great to be with Columbia. The Columbia community was always, just such a pivotal place for me, and it's really an honor to be back here with you and to share about something that is actually really near and dear to my heart, which is how we can actually start to turn our anxiety into a superpower. So a lot of people, would come to me at my office, I found, and I worked, again, very pleasure for me that I got to work with so many high achieving people. And I noticed that a lot of them would have anxiety. And sometimes they would often come to me and say, Dr. Chloe, how can I get rid of my anxiety? And one of the first things I want them to know is that we don't want to actually get rid of anxiety. Anxiety actually has a really healthy function, which is to stimulate preparation behaviors. So I'm going to be sharing with you about that. And that was really the topic of my book, is Nervous Energy, how to harness the power of your anxiety. So we're going to be learning a lot of things today. If you are the type of person who's active on social media and you want to share anything that you're learning, feel free to use the hashtag Nervous Energy, and I'm going to be giving away 3 copies of my book. After this event today, I'm going to be looking at that hashtag online through Instagram and Twitter, looking for that hashtag Nervous Energy, and I'll be giving away 3 copies of my book. So if you are the kind of person who likes to, share about what you're learning, this is a way to do it. And also, just so you know, psychology studies show that when we tell other people about things that we are learning, it's a way that we can also start to consolidate and organize in our brain the information that we are learning. So it's that chance to share it back and to reflect it to somebody else that can actually be a chance to deepen our learning as well. Now, just to dive right in, I want to start with, the obvious and kind of uncomfortable truth, which is that anxiety obviously can feel overwhelming. Yes, I'm telling you that there's a healthy side to it, but if we don't know how to unlock that healthy side, it can be very overwhelming. So some of us might be coming to this, with kind of a history with anxiety where we haven't necessarily known some of the benefits of anxiety. So for some of us, and, by the way, this is all stock photography. So nobody here was, thankfully actually in any of these situations. This is all just stock photography. But for many of us, anxiety can feel as if we're trapped between a rock and a hard place, or it can feel as if, we're walking on the proverbial tightrope, or it can feel as if our whole body is just, locked and frozen when we think about that fight, flight, or freeze response that many of us can get when a challenge can arise. So I just want to start by noticing and acknowledging that it's counterintuitive to think about harnessing the power of our anxiety. The good news is, though, and this is true as a clinical psychologist, I can tell you that there absolutely is a healthy function to anxiety. And again, that healthy function is to stimulate preparation behaviors. Anxiety can also demonstrate that somebody is really invested in their situation and really concerned about wanting to have a good outcome, right? So, for example, a person with no anxiety wouldn't think to look both ways before they cross the street, right? So there are definitely some hidden benefits to anxiety. We just have to know how to use it as a springboard to not only be more productive, but actually also find more fulfillment. Because again, we don't tend to feel anxiety unless there's something that's actually meaningful that we actually care about that, is triggering or provoking the anxiety. So once we learn how to manage it, believe it or not, it can actually be part of a very healthy picture in life. Now, just to share, I'm no stranger to anxiety myself either. So before I was a clinical psychologist, I was a yoga teacher. And after through teaching custom yoga programs and things like that, again, to very, kind of stressed out neurotic New Yorkers, I started to find that they were making really exciting changes with not only the yoga postures, but with the meditations that I was teaching them. And that's actually what triggered me to want to go back to school. It's what triggered me to go to Columbia with the goal of going then to get a PhD in clinical psychology. I then, started my practice from absolutely nothing. I had no financial safety net whatsoever, no parental support. I had no media contacts. I started my office, just really completely, from scratch. I was living in just a rooming house, in Manhattan. So I started out with a lot of anxiety when I started my practice. And I tell some of the stories in my book about, how that came to be, that I was able to channel my anxiety into something constructive, right? And before I knew it, my practice became very successful. Like within 6 weeks of opening, I was completely full. Within a few months, I had to hire other therapists. I started getting calls from television. And, next thing I knew, I had a book deal. I still can't believe that Deepak Chopra endorsed the book. The practice, also grew to the point where for 5 years now, I've been a member of Entrepreneurs Organization, which is where they have a minimum of $1 million a year in annual revenues documented. So I'm not telling you this to, just tout my own accomplishments, but I'm telling you this because anxiety for me was actually the driver of all of these things. I started off, like I said, with nothing, really afraid that I would have nothing to show but a big pile of student debt and, trouble really getting my therapy business off the ground. And, it was that anxiety that actually drove me to organize myself and to use some of the techniques on myself that I'm going to be sharing with you today, the week, so to speak, right? It's a very competitive school to get into in the first place. People don't just land at Columbia randomly, right? You tend to have a fair amount of drive, intelligence, organization, even just a healthy sense of ambition that's driving you to be there. And I had that same thing too. A lot of the clients who come to my office, have that sort of thing, and the characters I describe in my book. But what I have found is that there's often a tipping point where, maybe we start off just, we lost touch with the reasons and the fulfillment behind, why we want to do all these goals in the first place, right? So the tools that we're going to look at today are definitely goal-oriented, but they're also designed to help you stay in touch with yourself and reconnect with the purpose and the fulfillment around them, which is what, ironically, again, can kind of increase that anxiety. Sometimes the more things matter to us, sometimes that's the more that they can also, be a little bit anxiety provoking. The trick is just to know how to harness that anxiety so that we use it to get closer to our goals and to connect with the feelings around them, rather than just, kind of getting disturbed or anxious about the anxiety itself. The 9 techniques in my book, I always tell people, look, it's like a cookbook. You can choose whichever technique kind of matches your needs at that moment, with one exception. The first technique is a mindfulness technique because it's very important that we learn how to observe our stressor so that we know what type of technique we need, right? So sometimes people say, oh, well, the way to deal with anxiety is to just take a deep breath and let it go and do some relaxation exercises. Sometimes that's true, But sometimes actually the best way to deal with anxiety is to lean in and focus and, not do anything that's going to divert your mind or decrease your energy, right? And before we can really choose which type of approach is going to be most helpful, we first have to have a very mindful observation of the stressor and of how it's impacting us. So that's why of the 9 techniques in my book, the 8 are kind of all optional, and that we'll be voting on which one of those to go into today. Really starving, and you didn't even realize it until that moment, or maybe realizing, wow, I think I'm actually still pretty upset, about something that happened earlier today. So building those mindfulness skills will really help us to have that metacognition, the ability to understand what's going on with us so that we can make a good choice about what kind of anxiety tool is going to be most helpful for us, right? So obviously, we want to choose the right tool so it's going to be most helpful for us. Another great thing that mindfulness does is it does also help us with communication. So the way mindfulness really works is that we spend some time observing ourselves, and I'm going to guide you through that in a moment. And then to really finish it, we actually describe what we are feeling to somebody else. And that can either be, literally to another person, or you can just write down a few words to indicate, what you experienced in that moment. And we're going to do it on something really simple, which is the breath. And many of you might say, I've tried deep breathing before, but we're going to do it a little bit differently. And we practice observing the breath. And by getting good at describing something simple, like what a breathing exercise was like for us, we actually become better at describing situations where we're a little bit having to think on our feet, right? So if you see here, for example, suppose that this woman is supposed to be doing a screen share to do a presentation, but for some reason she can't figure it out, or there's a glitch. And so she's just got to wing it. She's got to hold up the paper and explain to people what's happened and just kind of stay loose and be able to do what psychologists call to narrate your experience, to be able to say, okay, wow, well, this was unexpected, but I do have some notes and I know we only have 20 minutes here. So I'm going to go ahead and do my best, or say this man here, suppose he's supposed to have a meeting with a professor to talk about something that he thinks the meeting is about. And then the professor's like, well, actually, we're here to talk about something different. And he's got to be able to kind of scramble. 2, the middle chest widens, and 3, the upper chest rises vertically, holding for a moment at the top of the inhale, feeling full of breath, noticing what that feels like. And then exhaling just the upper chest, then the middle chest, and then the belly empties completely. Maybe even taking navel to spine to really push all the air out. And then we'll do it one more time. The belly balloons with air. 2, the middle chest widens. 3, the upper chest rising vertically. Now holding there at the top of the inhale, maybe even relax your shoulders without exhaling. And then begin to exhale just your upper chest, and then your middle chest, and then the belly empties completely. Now just take a moment and just observe your breathing now. So you're not trying to do anything to change your breathing at this time. You're just letting yourself breathe naturally, but just taking a moment to notice your breathing. See if it feels different from the way that it felt maybe a few minutes ago, or from the way that it felt while you were in the middle of the exercise. And if anybody wants to chat in, a couple of comments, you can share those observations, and I won't be able to do the moderating, but Ashley, if you want to jump on and share any comments that people are typing in, that's great. Or if you don't want to share them with the group, that's fine. You can just write them down yourself. But remembering again that part of the goal here is to learn to pay attention to yourself and observe yourself. And everybody's probably heard the saying before, we don't practice at the game. We don't want to suddenly just practice observing ourselves when we're in, one of the hot seat moments of life. Many studies have shown, all those, medical studies I just had on the screen a few minutes ago, that people who practice observing themselves in a low stakes environment and then communicating what they observed are literally building the skill of being able to observe and describe themselves in higher stakes situations. So this man on the board here is just an example to kind of cue the idea that you make those observations about yourself and what